Hello, I'm Christine Rue. I'm the Art Gallery and Museums Manager with Aberdeen City Council.
Hello, I'm Thomas Hamilton from Hoskins Architects. I'm one of the architects who worked on the Aberdeen Art Gallery and Museum project.
Hello, I'm Lyndsey Bowditch of Studioarc. I'm one of the directors of the company.
And hello, I'm Helen Fothergill. I'm Head of Collections for Aberdeen Museums and Galleries, part of Aberdeen City Council. And I'm going to pose a question to the panel. How did we make decisions during the project, and how did we decide what to do and perhaps what not to do? And I'm going to start this time with Thomas, please, and then I'll move to Lyndsey and Christine. Thanks.
Well, I guess is how did we? So, do you mean us? I suppose is the first question. The client and the architect. I guess how we made decisions, and there were lots of decisions. So it depends when we're talking about. So I guess during the period that I was involved in the project, how we made decisions was quite often firstly we met in reality, which is a strange thing these days. But we had models, so we would bring a model and we would discuss the ideas and why we had come up with a certain idea or a way of arranging spaces, and then we might look at that model and we'd describe what we were trying to do in that model, and then you would have a look at it and get an understanding of what was happening. And I think then would be feedback from that. So there's models, and then there were drawings. So there are things like plans, which are maybe sometimes more difficult to understand, and I think probably they're a bit colder, I think. And then I know we did lots of drawings. So I remember we did a walkthrough through the whole gallery, which gave us an idea of what someone might experience from the front door, walking up through the front range as it had become, into the centre court, going up the stairs, going to the various galleries, and then going up to the rooftop. So I think that's how we presented the things, and then we got feedback from you. So you said, okay, that seems like a good idea. Maybe we could look at this. And then what we did was quite often we come up with options. So we come up with various ways of addressing an issue or solving a problem, and then we'd come back to you and ask you what you thought, and you'd guide us in one way, and maybe say that was less of interest to you and that was more interest to you. So I think that's, for me, that's how I think that's how we made decisions on the project. I think it's fair to say. So, which is I've got to say, quite an enjoyable process. The process of making models, and then actually the other thing that I've forgotten, we did. Remember, we did the full scale mock-ups. So we deciding what materials to use. We might bring a piece of Fermacell and would attack it with a claw hammer, or when we were doing the copper cladding, we had options. So we made full scale copper cladding mock-ups, and then we looked at them in the street, and we had the planners, and they gave their view and you gave your view, and then we took that forward. So also, I guess that's a kind of a big scale model. So we kind of lots of sizes of model, from full size to smaller size, computer visualizations, sketches, plans, and then feedback in meetings. So I think that's how we did it. So it's a great experience. It was really enjoyable, actually. So, and I hope the client team enjoyed it as well. So, cool.
Thanks, Thomas. Lyndsey, what about your side of things? How did we make decisions?
I think my first sort of very early memories of getting involved was getting feedback on what visitors prior to the redevelopment felt about the gallery space. So you as a client had undertaken commissioned market analysis and research, and that was really helpful. And we also fed off a lot of the work that Jura consultants were doing. So there was a whole load of focus groups that were run, that were, some of those were with visitors that had previously been, but they were also focus groups with people that had never set foot in the gallery before. So starting to kind of get an understanding of visitor motivations, that was really important early on for us, because that was the kind of, I suppose, the key to unlocking the audiences and trying to understand what kind of experience they would like in the art gallery. So I think that was at the real heart of it. And then we also worked very closely, obviously, with your team and with the curators. I remember coming up when you had big, sort of looking at the overall vision for the gallery, not just the now, but how might it evolve over the years once it was open. And that was important, again, in terms of how we looked at each of the spaces. And then one of the key things that the curatorial teams did was they developed a brief for each of the individual gallery spaces. So that was important because that identified the key messages. It looked at who the target audiences were. So each space had slightly different target audiences. It looked at the learning outcomes as well as looking at the artwork and the collection. So again, that was really, really important part of the process for us. And we used them right the way through the whole process. So we always went back and said, is this for teenagers? Is this for tourists? You know, who is this aimed at? And then from that, as a team, we in Studioarc, we developed up the detailed design packs. And those were important as well because that meant that we could communicate and share all these ideas, bring everything together. And they contained plans and elevations, but also they told the stories of what was going to happen in the spaces, and they looked at how we were going to deliver that. So using digital technology or film or audio or interactives or low-tech things, that was all created in that one place. And we also did visuals. So the visualizations of each of the spaces, again, I think those were really helpful because that meant that you could share them more widely with your team. And I think that whole kind of communication process on a project which in theory could have been incredibly complicated and difficult and stressful, actually from our point of view wasn't, because we had this very good communication. And I think by doing these things we had a shared vision quite early on in the project that then meant that we could all focus on what we were trying to deliver. But the key thing I think wasn't just doing that internally. There was then, as the designs developed, there was a lot of user testing that was involved, and that also had an impact on how we made decisions and how we responded. And that was things that you did internally with the gallery. You brought in different groups. We also did that with particularly interactives to assess how visitors would use them and to make changes, and to make sure that the displays were going to be as accessible and as inclusive as possible. So those were really the kind of key things that we were involved with in that whole decision-making process.
Thanks, Lyndsey. Christine, from our perspective, what do you think?
Well, I think both Thomas and Lyndsey have picked up a lot of points that I would probably want to raise. But maybe winding back even right to the start of the project, the first decision we had to make was appointing our architect. And that was done through a competitive process. And we had a tender qualification process that we went through. We came down to 19 practices. And from that 19, we had a shortlist of 6 that we interviewed. And out of the shortlist, Hoskins architects were appointed. So right from the beginning, it was a rigorous process. And we went through a similar appointment process with Studioarc, again, bringing it down to our preferred supplier, who I think I would say in both Hoskins and Studioarc's cases became our partners in delivering the project. And decision making, I think, varied from time to time. Early on, we were really just trying to decide, well, what do we need to do to achieve our vision for the building? You know, do we add a rooftop extension? Do we go down into the basement? The art gallery is on a corner site, so we couldn't go anywhere else except up or down. And so there was various kind of iterations of the architectural design were developed and costed that all became part of the process of informing our final decision. And once we decided which architectural design we wanted to go ahead with, it was then beginning to tease out the specifics, which Thomas has already spoken about. But one aspect, I think, that caused me quite a lot of concern, and lots of others, was the staircase at the front of the building. There if you were in the building in 2015, you would have seen what appeared to be a solid marble staircase going up from the main entrance to the first floor. And that was perceived to be an original staircase dating back to the building's foundation in 1885, and it was also thought to be solid marble. And both of those assumptions turned out to be incorrect. We went through a process of trying to understand the history of the building, and it became apparent through that research that the staircase originally in 1885 had been elsewhere in the building, and we think it was put in the location that you would have seen in 2015, round about 1904, 1905, when there had been another extension added on to the back of the building. So we'd lots of kind of discussions and debates about that. Would we keep it? Would we move it? If we kept it, it was going to impact on our ability to add a new top floor and to have one single route up through the building. And we came to the conclusion, I think the architectural team and the client working together, that we wanted to have a single staircase that spanned ground floor to the new top floor, rather than visitors having to find their way across the campus of buildings to get up from one floor to another. And we wanted to co-locate it with our passenger lift so that visitors could start their journey upwards and arrive at the same location, rather than trying to find other members of their party or their group somewhere else in the building. So that led us finally to the decision that we should relocate the staircase. And then the debate was about what would the staircase look like? Would we reuse the marble? Would we do something different? And we had 3 models, and I'm not sure if Thomas was with us at this point or working on the project at this point, but there was one that we called the orange peel, which looked very kind of spirally, that was in the middle of the sculpture court. That's where it started its journey upwards. There was another less spiral version of that. And then there was the staircase that we called the Scottish staircase, which is the one we finally decided, which is a very straightforward, I'm going to say plain staircase, but it's not unadorned, because we have lots of lovely metallic additions through the copper behind the handrail and the bronze handrail on the other side, and both of those are lit. And there's something incredibly dramatic about that staircase that I would never have imagined looking at the plans and the drawings, which is just that as you walk up through it, it starts quite dark actually on the ground floor, and you go up to the first floor and you're bathed in sunlight. You walk round to the next set of steps that then arrive at the new top floor, and you are absolutely bathed in wonderful sunlight. And I think that in itself is an experience that our visitors enjoy. And one of the things I've noticed is that they often choose that as a location to take their selfies on. So it was the right decision, but it was a difficult decision to make, and it was one that was, I would say, hard to convince people at the time was the right decision. And as it turned out, when we did start to dismantle the 1905 staircase, it wasn't solid marble at all. It was very, very thin sheets of marble veneer on a kind of brick and concrete structure. And we've been able to reuse that marble across the building. So I think I'll hand over to you, Helen, from a different perspective of the client.
Yeah, I think I mean, you know, like you said, everybody's covered the vast majority of what we were doing. I think what I reflect on with decision making is the complexity of it and the rigorous recording of that decision making as well. You know, we had multiple funders that supported this entire project. Obviously, the City Council is the major funder of this from our capital programme, but we had the Heritage Lottery Fund, now the National Lottery Heritage Fund, who have contributed nearly 10 million to the entire project. We also had lots of other grant awarding bodies and sponsors and donors, and every decision that we made, we had to ensure that we were including the right set of people in getting the approval for some of those decisions. Some of the decisions had knock-on effects to other things that we wanted to do. Some of them opened doors to allow us to do new and exciting things. Others closed avenues down, so that once we decided to go down that route, that was the only route that was then available to us. So things like decisions about where the vents were going to go for the input and the output of heating systems had an impact on where we can hang artwork. Things like the decisions over the alarm system or the air conditioning on the very top floor have an impact on how new major exhibitions can come in, and whether we can actually bring them in based on the lender's requirements. So that was, those are some of the big decisions, and then very small ones, like what type of pencils to use in individual galleries, because we didn't want to run the risk of using felt tip pens with artwork that's out there on display. What type of material to use on the seats that would allow us to clean them well, but still make them comfortable. What font to use on the labels or on the interpretation panels. All of these decisions, there were thousands and thousands of decisions looking back, and actually we had to record every one of them. And I found that whole documentation process and approval process and levels of approval really fascinating, sometimes frustrating when you just wanted to make a decision. But actually, a lot of the time, it was just really interesting to understand the way in which this enormous beast of a project works. Because when you see it at the end, it's a little bit like that swan analogy, isn't it? That it looks serene and smooth on the top, but my goodness, they're paddling like mad underneath. And I think that's my feeling over the whole decision-making process. As I say, there were big ones, there were small ones, but we still had to make them. And sometimes that pressure to make decisions within a particular time frame was quite heavy as well. And particularly when we were nearing the end of the project, that some of these were quite rapid, split minute decisions. But we had to keep going to make sure that the project was moving forward all the time. Anybody would anything? Oh, sorry, does anybody have anything else to add? Thomas.
Yeah, yes, me again. It was I guess there's as an architect, you make decisions all the time, and you communicate them with the client. And I suppose that a building is a series of decisions about what kind of handle, what material, whether this thing should be square, how wide should it be, how tall should it be, what should the material be, should you do the same thing here as you did there. So as an architect, there's all these decisions, and I suppose one of the things is you can't always refer to the client. So what you do is, and I think this is the difference between sort of like architecture could be quite mundane and architecture can be quite interesting. And I think Christine also touched on it with the journey up the stair, which is that you need to create a story for yourself, and that is then how you judge. And it helps you decide. So the story we created and we communicated with yourselves, and you bought into and you enjoy as well, is that you know, there's a journey through the building, and that journey through the building starts right at the front, you know, right at the front of the building. So you see the copper on the roof, you see the copper portals at the front door. The things that you touch are made out of, you know, bronze. You have the bronze handles on the door. So we always knew the door handles had to be bronze. So I touch something else, what does that have to be made out of? That has to be made out of bronze. So the handrails ended up made out of bronze. So there's this kind of consistency. So the handrails on the stair are bronze because that's material using to, the thing that guides you to the top floor is a kind of, you know, a bronze light that takes you to the top, and then it takes you to the circle of bronze at the top. Or if you're in the War Memorial Court, the bronze handrail there is also related to the bronze handrail on the stairs, which is related to the bronze handrail on the roof. So that's one story. And then there's another story which is about the portals themselves. So this grey world that is basically a transition between a gallery. So it does lots of work between the galleries. It houses things like, you know, humidifiers, Wi-Fi, you know, all those things. It's doing a lot of hard work, but actually it's a story. It's about, I am a transition between spaces. And the same way the stair is a transition between spaces. It's a transition between the various levels of the building. And the overall story of the building in terms of the transitions is that journey that Christine has highlighted there. So you can travel between galleries, or you can travel between the gallery and the city. So you start off at the bottom of the court, you work your way up through the galleries, experiencing all the art, going through all these different portals, and you go up through the stair to the point where the city itself becomes the exhibit. So you have the portals, which are freight, you have the cafe in them and open out onto the, you know, out of the west terrace, and then you have the portal which then allows you to go out onto the south terrace, and that is that's the gallery showing you the city. After you've experienced the art, the gallery says, well, okay, here you go, look, this is a thing, this is a place, enjoy the city. And as an architect, that's how you start to make decisions, because you can't always say, Christine, should this be 50 mil, 100 mil, or so actually having a story allows you to make those decisions without always having to refer to the client. So, but you buy into the story, and then we, you know, that's, I think for me, that's what makes it an interesting piece of architecture, because it allows you to wend this idea. And whether people are immediately, if people never understand that's what it is, I think it registers somewhere that there's a consistency of approach. So I think that's one way we make decisions. That's a kind of underneath the curtain sort of how architects work.
But I think the good thing, Thomas, was though that we developed that story together. We worked in partnership.
Absolutely,
to do that. So we both understood what was happening, and we felt involved, and I hope you felt involved in our vision for the building as well. And you know, that's similar to the way that we worked with Studioarc. It was about developing things together, so that we all had this shared understanding of what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think that's where things like the storyboards, where we went through that journey and had different options, and how would that then support the strategic aims for the building. So actually opening up all these doors between the areas, views, you know, accessibility, and you know, quite often those things are co-supportive, if you like. You know, they reinforce each other. So a single stair with a lift, which becomes a focal point between levels, is both an architectural aim, but also an aim in terms of the strategic sort of benefit to the building. So I think that's for me, it's really important. And those all came from discussions with yourself, analysis of the building, looking at your aims, exploring those aims. So I think that's quite I mean, it's a massive process, and it's quite difficult to summarise in a sort of short period, actually. But it's, I mean, very enjoyable, actually. So that certainly the early doors is an extremely enjoyable part of an architect's job.
Lyndsey, do you need to add anything?
I think I would just reiterate that it was that bringing together. So the architecture opened the building up, and the visit. You know, I think we were always very focused, along with the client, looking at the visitor journey. So it was a physical journey through the spaces that, you know, Hoskins architecture enabled by creating this fantastic kind of processional route between the gallery spaces. But it was also, from our point of view, an emotional journey that we were trying to take the visitor on in terms of the look and feel and colour and surprises as you went through the galleries, and each one was different. Each one was a different experience, and so I think those kind of decisions as well, to, you know, to try and pace that and create vistas and, you know, use the building to make that visitor experience something that is quite remarkable. And as Thomas says, as a visitor, you might not actually process all of that, but it's a feeling that you get. And I think the gallery has achieved that, you know, that sense of joy and pleasure of being in a building that is beautiful, surrounded by lovely things, but also things that are accessible and interesting and you can get to grips with. It's not too standoffish. So I think all of that, you know, informed all the decision making throughout.
I mean, I've got to say, I mean, quite apart. The building always had its pleasures, and I think that together we worked to bring them out, to show them to their best advantage. But the other thing that you've always had is an amazing collection, and I think again, you know, the team have worked to make those things, you know, front and center. And I think that's the wonderful thing about what we have now, is that, you know, a beautiful building shown off to its best light, an amazing collection shown off to its best light in a way which allows as many people as possible to enjoy it. So, you know, I don't think you could, I mean, I daren't say we could ask for more. So it's just wonderful.
And I think that's a fair comment, Thomas, as well. And you know, we talk about the decision making in the project, and I think Lyndsey certainly sort of mentioned this. But we spent an awful lot of time very early on in the project actually asking our regular audience and actually people who never visited before what they would most like to see on display. And we looked at different themes and different topics to explore. We couldn't cover them all by any stretch of the imagination, even with more gallery space, but we've ended up with a bank of options ready to come in behind these first collection galleries, and I think that that's really exciting, and some of the team are working on those right now. So you know, it feels like it's very quick, but in museums and galleries, you know, really it takes a good sort of 2 to 3 years minimum to develop a new exhibition space from scratch. And so, you know, we're trying to get ahead of the game, and actually some of those galleries will be changing, and that was always the intention, and that was where we wanted to be at the beginning of the project as well. So I'm going to stop this one now, if that's okay. Oh, Thomas, do you want to start?
No, I guess, I mean, I suppose it is amazing that, you know, you have enough quality artifacts to be able to, you know, and paintings and exhibits, to be able to do that, you know, to have a bank of things that you can keep bringing and showing to people. And I think one of the things that I mean, it's part of the context we are living through now, is that how important those things are to our life, actually. And having recently been on holiday and had been up to the art gallery, is that, you know, having not had them for 6 months, to see them is such a joy. You know, that's so important, and we're so lucky you have so many good exhibits and paintings, and, you know.
And I think it's fair to say, Christine, as well, that it's been an incredibly painful process in cutting out some of the artwork that we wanted to put on display, and we just simply didn't have the space to include it. There's some favourites that we didn't get to display in this first iteration, but we were always of the view that actually we will put them on display soon.
I mean, one of the things we did was try and develop a list of star objects that we felt had to be in our interpretation. And we talked to visitors about that, and different groups about what was their star picks, what were their top favourites. I think it'd be fair to say that amongst us, we could I say squabbled? I mean, we had, you know, really quite rigorous debate about what should be in and what shouldn't. That's good. That's really healthy, and it also, I think, made sure that we had great variety in the various themes that we did eventually choose to display in the 18 collections galleries.